I'm Vanessa Tyler. Welcome to Sarder TV, an idea-sharing platform founded by Russell Sarder, author, entrepreneur, and CEO of Netcom Learning. Trust, built slowly, destroyed quickly. It can make or break a company, so says our next guest, Joel Peterson, professor, chairman of JetBlue, author, and entrepreneur. Mr. Peterson, thank you so much for joining us.
Call me Joel.
You're an inspiration to every entrepreneur. Tell us about your career journey and give us insight into your leadership style.
Well, I started out, my first job out of business school was with a fellow by the name of Trammell Crow, and he offered me a job on the French Riviera. I didn't know anything about real estate. I didn't know anything about the Trammell Crow Company, but I thought it was so cool to go work on the French Riviera that I took the job. Now, I liked Mr. Crow a lot, and he taught me a lot of things. He was actually a mentor of mine. And so I progressed rapidly, became the chief financial officer. I actually became the chief financial officer of a company that had no money and was trying to work out of a bunch of problems, which was one of the better experiences in my life because I had to work through a bunch of difficult situations at a very young age, and they were problems that I hadn't caused, so it was easier to kind of just work my way intellectually through them and implement and move on. So in any event, I ended up there as the chief executive officer, the CEO, what they call the managing partner of Trammell Crow Company. And after I left there, I went to work actually for teaching for Stanford University. They needed somebody to fill in for a year teaching a real estate course. They'd lost the professor, so I said, oh, I'll do it for a year because I know real estate. 27 years later, I'm still there. And then I started buying companies and ended up with somebody telling me, hey, you're in the private equity business. And I didn't even know the term at the time, but we've since raised a number of funds in private equity and bought a number of companies. You asked about my leadership style. I think it is in some ways captured in this book, The 10 Laws of Trust, because I really believe that the most important thing you do as a leader is select the people that are going to be around you. Business is a team sport, and if you think it's all about you, you'll never succeed. So I think collecting the right people, assessing the right people, grooming the right team is the way I try to lead. Stan McChrystal is actually writing the foreword for the next book that I've got, and he has this phrase that I love. I mean, I hope it's true, but he said Joel Peterson nudges an organization in the right, he nudges a management team, and that's really what I like to do.
And you can't nudge without trust.
You can't nudge without trust. You build a relationship over many years, conversation at a time, and as that trust builds, you can help not necessarily convince people, they can convince you, but you're problem solving mutually, and that's a great way to lead.
What is your role as chairman of JetBlue, and how is the airline doing today?
Well, the airline industry is a tough industry. I always say it's a little bit like the real estate industry, capital intensive, regulated, cyclical, depends on a few huge variables that can go against you. So it's a bit of an IQ test to say to go from real estate to the airline industry. You know, the line that Warren Buffett used about the airline industry where he said, you know, we'd have all been better off if Wilbur had just shot Orville. So it's a tough industry, but it's also a fun industry with a lot of great people, and you're doing something that's really important. You're getting people safely to see loved ones on vacation for business meetings, and it's just it gets in your blood. What they call people having jet fuel in their veins. It just gets to be moving in that direction. So in terms of the role of chairman, you basically are to lead the board. You can be called the lead director in some organizations where you have a chairman and CEO as the same person, or I think more people are now splitting the two roles. So as the chairman, you basically work with the CEO to set a board agenda, to set priorities, and then when you have an executive committee meeting at the end of the normal board meeting, you then are responsible for running that and giving feedback to the CEO. So in some ways, you become the CEO coach. So for my years at JetBlue, I've had Saturday morning calls with the CEO. For a while, it was every Saturday morning for an hour. Now it's once or twice a month for an hour, and we go over all kinds of things. But the most important thing a board does is select the CEO. So that's the very most important way a board can influence a company. And as the chairman, you are really in charge of evaluating the CEO, working with other board members, and doing that.
I read that you bought more than 100 businesses. Was there something common among them, something key that always appeals to you when purchasing and buying a business?
Yeah, I think the number is actually more than 250 now. To me, the most important variable is, again, selecting the right people. I think Trammell Crow used to have a line. He said, it's hard to do good business with bad people. And I found that to be so true. Now, good people can often have businesses that don't work out too. So you have to look at both the people, their quality, how hard they work, how thoughtful they are. There's this phrase that we talk about, being able to see around corners. You know, see what hasn't happened yet. I think it was the editor of the Saturday Review, whose name I'm blocking on, but he said a line that has always stuck with me, even though his name hasn't, which is, wisdom is the ability to predict the future. This idea that wise people know how the confluence of events come together to generate a result. So I look for people with wisdom.
And vision, that's a lot of, which is another buzzword.
Right. It's a similar kind of a notion.
Yeah.
So looking for those kinds of people, finding those kinds of people that are high character, that you can work well with, that are not driven by ego, but that are pleasant to work with, is one thing. And then there are certain businesses, those with recurring revenue, where you get the business built up and the revenues then, where you don't have to sell every day. Those are often more attractive than the ones where you have to create a new product every year and sell it every year. Those can be more up and down. But we've done a number of those. I think everything is technology enabled today. So I think you have to think about, how is technology going to impact this business going forward? The other thing we look at is, do we have anything to add? In other words, we always have money that we could put in, but everybody can put money in. Any investor can do that. Do we have some special sauce, something secret that we can do that would really add to this business to help them? We see ourselves as partners to entrepreneurs, not their investors only. We really want to be in partnership with them. Consequently, we have lots of repeat deals. We've done a number of deals with the same entrepreneurs over and over again, and we like that. We like building relationships.
You're also a professor at Stanford, which is amazing, laying a solid foundation for the next generation of business leaders. You speak a lot about creating a certain culture in business. Is culture more than a buzzword today, but is it truly the key to success?
It's a key to success. You have to have a great product, great service. You have to build a moat around it. You have to do a lot of things. But culture is the most driving. In a business like JetBlue, for example, everybody flies the same equipment between the same places, with the same terminals, using the same kinds of pilots and flight attendants and everything. So how do you differentiate a business like that is ultimately kind of a commodity business? So we can do a number of things at the edge to change, but the most important thing we can do is create a great culture where people are happy, where they are learning, where they're growing, where they're developing. And if you do that, then you have happy crew, we call them crew members. You have happy crew members, and happy crew members create happy customers, and you create a spirit that we call the JetBlue experience. And we want the JetBlue experience to be differentiated from the experience you have with Brand X.
Tell us about your latest book, The 10 Laws of Trust. Why did you originally decide to write a book about trust, and then why did you later expand it with the new book?
So I think trust is in crisis in society. I think it is a real problem. And I think we see that with millennials especially. While they're tremendously idealistic, On the other hand, they've seen the Wall Street meltdown. They've seen the college admissions scandal. They've been told, get a college education, and they end up with a bunch of debts and no job. Buy a home, and they end up with a big mortgage, and the home prices don't go up. And there's a lot of things that have made them wary and wonder about trust. Social media is another thing that I think people are critical. People can be pretty rough on social media, and I think people respond poorly to that, obviously. We all have all these issues of what people call fake news, where people don't trust news sources anymore. And social media is kind of taken over where people get a lot of their news. We have a nearly dysfunctional government now. It's so toxic. The kinds of discussions that go on are so toxic that people then say, well, what can I trust? And so I wanted to write something that analyzes trust. What is trust? And how do you build trust? How do you become trustworthy yourself? And then how do you build a culture of high trust? And if you do, I can promise you that your company will be more innovative, the people will be happier, they'll be more flexible, the decisions made will be more durable, and you'll be able to recover from reversals. So it's a really powerful currency to have in a company. It's also fragile. You know, it's kind of what I call one-way sticky. You know, it builds and builds and builds a conversation at a time, and you can destroy it in an instant. So trust is really important. I call it the operating system of a life well lived. So if you can live your life in a high trust manner, you have this operating system that allows you to really get a lot done quickly and effectively. So that's the first part of that. The second part is why a second edition. HarperCollins, who's a big publisher, bought AMA, American Management Association, which was a small publisher of business books. And one of the titles they got in the acquisition was The 10 Laws of Trust. And so they said, you know, we'd like to do a second edition of this, but in order to do that, we have to have about 30% new material. And so I thought about what people were asking me when I would talk about trust, and there were two questions. The first one was, yeah, but if you trust, you'll be betrayed, and what do you do if you're betrayed? And the truth is, if you trust, you will be betrayed at some point in time. Betrayed can mean anything from being disappointed, the results not coming in, to people intentionally betraying you. So how do you deal with betrayal so that you don't become wary and just overly cautious and unwilling to? So that was one. And then the second question they asked was, how do I know what the trust level in my organization is? I'm a leader, nobody talks to me anymore. How can I find out where the trust level is so I can build from there? So we built a diagnostic, working with Franklin Covey, that would give you sort of the existing trust level in your organization. You say, gosh, we're a low trust organization, or we're medium trust, or we're really high trust, and then work from there to intentionally build trust, a conversation, an action, a transaction, a relationship at a time.
How would a CEO determine where the trust level is in his organization?
Trust, I mean, the CEO is really probably the most powerful setter of trust in the organization. What CEOs do, other people tend to follow. We found that if CEOs are joggers, a lot of people are joggers. If they're smokers, a lot of people are smokers. If they're overweight, people tend to be overweight. It really has a huge effect on an organization. And frankly, if you see the CEO saying one thing and doing another, there's a cynicism that develops, and you don't turn over your life to whatever it is the agenda, whatever the agenda is of that CEO. Your priorities aren't the same. And really sharing priorities is how you have a great team. You talk about culture, is it just a word? Peter Drucker, who's kind of the father of modern management, said culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what he meant by that is that anybody can copy your strategy, but your culture is this really fragile thing that's built up by individuals and this nexus of relationships. And so the CEO is really at the cutting edge of that. And so if he or she is not setting a good culture, you probably have to make a change in the CEO.
And culture is intentional. It just doesn't happen.
Well, it does just happen if you don't. So I was actually teaching a class one time, and I said something about culture, and this was an exec ed group, and one of the students said, "We don't got no stinking culture in our company." I said, "That's exactly what you've got, is a stinking culture."
That is it, yeah.
Yeah, because culture will grow up just based on the priorities of the people there, and it'll grow up by topsy, and it'll grow in directions that you may not necessarily like. So I think the job of the CEO is to set a good example, and then nurture where things happen. You know, nurture those positive things, reward them.
We kind of talked about this a little bit, but how really big of a problem is the lack of trust in America's companies today?
I think it's huge.
Yeah.
I think it's really a serious problem. And you see it in cynicism. You see it on social media. You see it people talking at the water cooler. You see people shutting down, people not really buying into what the company's trying to do. So I think you see it all over the place. And that's
Do you think
really,
managers are aware of it, or they just feel helpless to try to change it?
I think they're viscerally aware of it. They may not be able to put the words around it. They say, oh, these people are jerks, or, you know, I don't like working with this team, which is a reflection typically of we have not paid the price to build a high trust relationship. Therefore, we come to this bottom line that says, I can't work with these people, or these millennials, or they're impossible. They are snowflakes, or whatever labels people put on. Whereas really, you just have to build these levels of trust, and you have to work through, you have to listen, you have to capture what people are saying, and you have to build the trust. Now, sometimes that means doing radical surgery.
Talk about the surgery. How can you build trust? I mean, you're working at a place, it's just a lack of trust. People don't, backstabbing, rumors, whatever. How do you start from there and go up?
Typically, you have to have conversations, one-on-one conversations with people and understand. And you listen until you're able to reflect what they've said better than they've said it. So they say, you now understand. That's the gathering, that's the capturing. Typically within that, you'll find that there are a couple of troublemakers. There are a couple of people that are inflaming issues. Often so I always make the distinction between stars and divas. And you can't tell, typically, when you first go into an organization, the stars and the divas look a lot alike. They're smart, they're hardworking, they're outspoken, they do tremendous things, but divas are ultimately destructive to culture, and stars actually build the culture. So you may have to figure out who the divas are, and then I think you have to move them on. What Alan Mulally, who's the former president of Ford Motors, said, help them find another place to be happy, which is a great way of saying, you know, get them out of your organization.
I guess we talked about this a bit, changing, whether it's difficult to change that culture of mistrust. You mentioned meeting one-on-one. In a large corporation, that can take a while to do that.
Yeah, Vanessa, though, typically people have a few direct reports. They have key ones, and it's usually 6 or 7 or something like that. If it's more than 15, you need to reorganize. So you need to have the conversations with your direct reports. And it is hard work, and it takes time to do that. But here's the most difficult part, is that often you have to change yourself. It isn't just the organization, the interactions with people. The question is, am I trustworthy? Typically, when we have these betrayals and breakdowns, we've joint ventured them. We don't like to think that. We like to blame these other people, they would just do things, but we're part of it. And so we have to really assess, what is it about me and the way I behave? And you may have to go in and do surgery on your own operating system. And a lot of people are unwilling to think about that, say, how did I contribute to this? Get feedback, listen to it, reflect it back to people, let people know I'm working on the following. I remember one time somebody said to me that you're selling after the sale has been made. You're keeping, you keep talking, you keep pushing the sale, and the sale's already been made. And that was hard to hear. In fact, Bob Waterman was a management guru back in the 80s. He and Tom Peters wrote this book, In Search of Excellence, which was a huge bestseller. He was my coach when I first became a CEO. He came to a board meeting and watched me lead the board meeting. I thought I'd done a great job. And I said, well, so what did you think? And I thought he'd just be all pats on the back. And he said one thing. He said, you talk too much. I said, well, maybe, but what did you think of the content where we got? You talk too much. And he was absolutely right. And I had to accept that, understand that feedback, process it, and learn to listen better. So here I am talking a lot in this, but you're asking questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, that works well. So
in
you
an
became
interview.
a professor, yeah.
Yeah.
How does today's technology in the workplace affect trust?
That's a great question. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it can make it so people don't really have meaningful, it's so easy. I mean, my wife and I will sit in the house together and text each other. And she's 20 feet away and she's texting me and I'm texting her an answer. I mean, it's just so easy to get quick answers, and that diminishes a little bit the trust-building nature of relationships. So I think, and then I think what goes on in social media can actually make people pretty wary. Social media can be pretty rough on people. There's a lot of attacks that go on that people wouldn't say to each other if they were face-to-face and had a flesh and blood human being in front of them. So I think that's the downside. On the other hand, it can keep there from being silos and from people closing in on their own little group. It actually can fertilize conversation with more points of view. And so I think it's a double-edged sword.
And the silos, again, are just people, how would you define that? Just information just staying within one team or?
Yeah, whereas social media, or just having a way electronically to communicate, you can do surveys, you can hear from people. At JetBlue, we send out a letter every week to 25,000 employees. So we're communicating with them, whereas that would be impossible, before there was this kind of When I was CEO at Trammell Crow Company, I used to send out a partner letter every 2 weeks, and it would be printed up and mailed out, and it was a lot of work to get it out every 2 weeks. And now we do it electronically, we get it out every week. And anytime there's a major event, we get it out so that people are reading about us inside the enterprise, not through the press.
And trust, again, keeping people well informed is a big aspect of trust.
Huge.
Yeah.
And it's not just telling them good things. Everybody is sensitized to spin and being told only the good things. Real trust comes when people say, here's what's not going well, here's what we need to do. It's talking about the bad news as well as the good news. It's talking about events before as well as after. It's keeping those lines of communication open. I mean, in a sense, it's transparency. Transparency makes us trust. Closing things off, silos, to use the word you were using, closing things off into silos builds walls of mistrust.
How does a high trust culture save a company money?
Well, for one thing, things go faster because you don't have to double check everything. You don't have to have all these tattler rewards and things. There's less politics. While I use a lot of lawyers and have many friends who are lawyers, when you get lawyers involved, it's typically they are looking at remedies, what happens if things go wrong. There are contracts. The thicker the contract, the slower the process. And so trust can actually allow things to go quickly and smoothly, and it also allows you to be flexible. So I remember doing a deal with a prominent lender when I was in the real estate business, and he was completely flexible. When the problem came out, he never went back to the so the documents were thick and they covered everything, but he didn't look back at the documents and say who had what rights and whatever. It was what makes sense. How do we solve this? How do we do it quickly? Because there was high trust. And high trust allows you to resolve problems quickly and smoothly. So I think it saves on time, and I think it makes people more flexible.
How does a high trust culture lead to more and better innovation?
Well, when you're innovating, you're making mistakes. In the Silicon Valley, they talk about go to market quickly, fail quickly. is the key to innovating, because you can't get everything right the first rattle out of the box. So they say, get it out to the market. The customers will tell you what's working and what isn't working. Well, inside organizations, you have customers, they just happen to be sitting in the desk next to you. So try things, fail quickly, adjust, innovate, try the next iteration. And in high trust, it's fun to innovate that way. In low trust, it becomes political. It becomes a way to point fingers, recrimination. People spend time assessing blame. And I used to tell people when I was working with them, it's not going to solve the problem to figure out who we can blame. Let's get on with solving the problem. And you can do that in high trust organizations. In low trust ones, people are always pointing fingers.
One of your laws is to fix breaches immediately. Should leaders drop other priorities when there's a breach of trust?
My short answer is yes, but I think there are different kinds of breaches. The simplest breach is if let's say you ask me to turn something in by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I don't get it in. That's a breach of trust. We had a deal. And the way you build trust is by delivering on promises. I didn't deliver on the promise, so that's a minor breach of promise. I got it in an hour late. And I would say you still want to fix that immediately. What happened is my dog ate my homework. It rained on me. I mean, there's information that you want to know. Maybe I ran into a problem with technology or whatever, but I think you want to fix it. What happens if you don't? You check it up and say, Joel doesn't get things in on time. I really kind of resent that. And you just make a little check mark by that, but it grows over time until finally, I have one entrepreneur that comes to class and she says, I love you, I love you, I love you, get out of here. Because she doesn't deal with the problem along the way until finally it just, she can't take it anymore. So I think fixing those kinds of breaches immediately is really important. There are the more serious breaches where somebody intentionally violates your trust. They do something to harm you on purpose. I think it's unusual to be able to fix those. In most cases, the fix for those is to move on, get out of business with that person, get out of the relationship with that person, and move on. Sometimes the stakes are so high that you really have to go in and do the therapy that allows you to reconnect and work on things again. But most breaches in business are these smaller breaches, and I find if you fix them right away, stay in real time with people, every day goes by and we have feedback. Say, oh, I was disappointed in this. This didn't work out quite how I wanted. Help me understand that we solve those problems every single day and our trust level stays high.
Mistakes can be made in a trust culture, as we know, but how do you move on after the trust has been breached? And I was reading somewhere the story about when you were growing up, how you had the accident when your dad gave you back the keys and said, try right away. So you believe, again, when trust has been breached, so to speak, to repair it and to quickly move on?
To quickly give the person another chance. That story, may I tell that story a little
Absolutely,
bit? Because it's
yes.
So this was when I was 15 years old and I wanted to drive, and I was not yet old enough to drive, but we had a long driveway. And so my dad gave me the keys to the car and I backed out on an L-shaped driveway, hit the tires against the curb that was on a berm, and then hit the gas, and I went up over the berm and hung the car up on the berm, and I tried like crazy to get it out and I couldn't do it. So I went in finally and got my dad. He got a neighbor and they got the car back going, and I said, well, that's the end of driving, maybe the end of driving for a long time. And as he was walking into the house, he turned around and tossed me the keys and said, don't forget to put it in drive this time, son. And I've thought of that so many times when I've been working with somebody who's let me down or hasn't gotten something done. Don't forget to put it in drive this time. Because that experience, they will have learned a ton from it. And not to capitalize on that, not to give them a chance, actually diminishes the relationship, diminishes their learning, diminishes the opportunity to build a high trust culture. So that's one of the ways that I think you deal with failure and how you learn from it.
And I bet you never forgot to put it in drive
I never,
ever again.
I made other mistakes, but not that one.
Talk about the rumor mill. How does that tie into trust, and what can rumors do to a company?
Well, they can destroy trust, obviously. Rumors are often not substantiated. They're not true. They're made up. People have an agenda with rumors. I think communication by rumor is the worst way to communicate. To me, we talk directly, openly. If we hear some kind of rumor, we confront the person and say, I heard the following, help me understand. And so you just kind of eliminate it. And there's no reason to have rumor. If you have a transparent organization, then there's no percentages in rumor. So I think you want to root rumor out of the organization. Now, people talk, people have agendas, people can, be small in certain things and petty, but I think you never participate yourself is one thing. You don't allow your team to, and then you hope that radiates throughout the organization. Example is a powerful thing.
But there's going to be conflict. What should good leadership do to turn conflict into something useful for a company?
So I'm a believer in conflict. I like conflict. It's interesting. The great movies that you see always have conflict that get resolved. I mean, no storyline is interesting without there being some tension. I've even assigned people to take the opposite point of view and present it, so that when we have a tough decision to make, I want somebody to make the counterfactual. Take it on and make the case against the decision that we're making, so that we can look at it. The conflict that I like, though, is respectful conflict. I think if the conflict becomes swearing or barking at people or throwing things or those kind of high emotion driven conflicts, those are almost always destructive. They almost never work. Whereas we can disagree in an agreeable way. Just say, okay, what I hear you saying is I now understand it and I don't agree with it, and here's the following reason. That's healthy. You want that. You want to celebrate that conflict. So I talk about conflict-less organizations. Quiet organizations have the health of a hospital. They're quiet, but people are sick. You don't know it. So I think you want a certain level of conflict. It's the exchange of ideas. You all talk about a learning organization. Learning organizations are full of ideas. One of the sad things that's going on in the colleges today is that people don't allow disparate points of view. And colleges have it's a place to experiment, to hear things, and to shut down speech or just hear one kind of thing it's anathema to learning and growing and building a great culture.
Let's talk negotiations. You believe they are serial, not episodic. Explain that.
So a lot of people see negotiation as I get something that it's a zero-sum game, and whoever has the most power wins the negotiation. And we struggle and we figure out who has the most power, and then I win, you lose. My experience is that I'm going to have a lifelong relationship with you. If you're a negotiator and I'm a negotiator, I'm going to try to build a relationship with you where this is one of a series of a number of negotiations. Now, sometimes it is one-off, but I've found that even those one-off negotiations become serial because your friend or your friend's child I'll run into a decade down the road with a reputation for being unfair. I want my reputation to be fair. I want to solve for fair, not for winning. I want to know what it is you want to achieve, and I want to try to help you achieve it at a cost to me that is acceptable to me. So if you say, I have to have this, I'll price it in a way that I'll be recompensed for what it is. But we should both walk away from the table having gotten something. Again, to get back into politics a little bit, I think that's one of the problems we've got is that people won't let anybody else win. And really effectiveness in business and in life and in family is letting the other party win, helping them win in a way that you also win.
You teach aspiring entrepreneurs at Stanford. How do those ambitious millennials react to your belief about trust?
Well, I've had some people, so I've had a couple of interesting experiences. One, I got some feedback that said, Joel is really old school. And I took that as a compliment. I had another one that I laughed at and really loved, where I asked the students for feedback, and this woman wrote, "More of us, less of you," which gets back to my problem with talking too much, I think, which I thought was really funny and clever, and I was so glad that she could give me that feedback. But to really seriously answer your question, I think they're relieved. I think they expect to be cautious, wary, cynical, tear things apart. You know, they think that's what they're there for. And I think when they see somebody that says, how do we solve this? Let's move forward. Put that away, forget that, let's move on. Reflect credit, absorb blame. These kinds of ideas about how do you build other people up? How do you make them better? How do you help them achieve their dreams? You know, I think they're relieved. I think that they really think that's a cool thing. So while they might not say it, I really think they get a little bit inspired by wanting to develop that kind of a culture.
I find them so passionate, but they also love a sense of fairness too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fairness is a powerful concept.
It really
now,
is.
it's in the eye of the beholder too. So you have to help people understand how to think about fairness. But solving for fairness is really a great way to think about negotiation.
How can companies transform a low trust culture into a high trust culture, and when and how should they begin?
So you're not going to like this first part of it, but I think it may mean you have to fire some people. I mean, that's the most powerful way to change a culture, is to remove the violators of culture. And so if you have some people that really just don't get it or won't get it or are low trust people, you may need to remove them. And that is really a powerful statement. Now, there are more subtle ways to do it. I think it starts with you. If you're the leader, I think you have to then have an open door policy. You have to listen to people. You have to show respect to every person. You cannot be dismissive of the newest receptionist. You get to know who they are. You spend enough time with them. You ask about their children. It takes only a few moments to spend a little bit of extra time with people, and you build it up again slowly. But I think you probably have to get rid of the violators.
What's your most important advice for an employee who's been intentionally betrayed by a trusted colleague or even their boss?
If it's your boss, get out. There's a lot of opportunities in this world. There's no reason to work for somebody who would betray you, who would intentionally betray you. The hard part is that you'll have to move on and get over that betrayal, and that can really be tough. In the book, I think I talk about Cortez burning the ships at Veracruz so people couldn't get back on them. In effect, that's what you have to do with the betrayal. You have to burn the ship, because otherwise you'll go back to that burning ship all the time. You'll relive the betrayal, and you won't live in the future. So I think that's the hardest part of it. But I think getting out of, I always say that when you have a values conflict with somebody, which fundamentally means your priorities just can't get synced up, neither of you is going to compromise. You're in for an unhappy experience, and because there are so many fish in the sea, get another fish.
Excellent. Well done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vanessa.
And thank you so much for watching Sarder TV, an idea-sharing platform where thought leaders come to share their ideas. I'm Vanessa Tyler. I'll see you next time.